Hello and welcome to our 20th edition of FSI Fridays. I'm Johansson, live in Charlotte, joined by Edwin in Boston. Hey Edwin, what do we have lined up for today?
Happy Friday, Johansson, and those watching live on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about a landing zone success engagement that was recently performed for a banking customer, why it's important, and the approach that was taken, and the many benefits that it has yielded. Next, we'll talk about Azure Databricks, the business value technical approach, and how we work through obstacles with a global financial corporation. Third, we'll get to see Azure Databricks in action. Then we'll wrap it up with Q&A today on FSI Fridays. So for those of you watching live or on YouTube, as a quick reminder, we'll spend 30 minutes on today's topic, leave the last 5 to 10 minutes to address any burning questions. So please use the Q&A window to ask any questions. If you're watching the recording, feel free to use the comments below to ask your questions. So let's get started and meet the presenter for today. Johansson, who's our special guests this week?
Thanks, Edwin. We are thrilled to be joined by two guests today, but let's start with Matt Felton. Matt, thanks for being on the show today. Can you let our audience know what your role is at Microsoft and what your typical day entails? Also, we hear that you have a technical blog with a catchy name. You want to tell us about that?
Sure. So my name is Matt Felton. I'm a cloud solution architect over here at Microsoft. I have a specialty in infrastructure and security. Been in the industry for over 15 years or so. My day-to-day, so we have two types of cloud solutions architects, those that are dedicated to accounts and those that work across a lot of accounts. I'm the latter, so any given day I'll work with 6 or 7 different customers on a variety of problems, typically are in the infrastructure and security space. As my spare time, I keep a technology blog I have for probably over 10 years now called journeyofthegeek.com. Often posts about customer problems that I run into on a day-to-day basis at Microsoft, the solutions that we come up with, and also do a lot of technical deep dives into specific products that go a little bit deeper than our public docs.
Hey, Matt, that's really awesome. And by the way, as a fellow New Englander, we're going to enjoy this 70-degree weather this weekend. So for those of you watching in New England, let's celebrate this. So Matt, I did go through some of your blog posts, and I do appreciate how you take some complex scenarios and do a great job explaining it. You mentioned on the blog there's no better way to learn a topic than to teach it. So we're looking forward to having you teach something today. So, talk to us about the landing zone. What is it at a high level, and why should our financial services audiences care?
Sure. So landing zone is really a core component of any cloud journey. So it's really going to represent it's going to take into account the people, process, and technology of any given organization. And what it's going to do is going to help create a framework of identity and access management, networking, governance, and security. The best metaphor that you can think about with it is imagine if what your cloud journey is going to consist of building a hotel, right? So let's say just draw that metaphor. That landing zone piece is really going to be the foundation of that hotel. You may want to build 10 floors, you may want to build 100 floors, but at the end of the day, that foundation is going to hold it all up. So that's why the landing zone and getting it right and doing all the right processes to make sure that's right is going to be so critically important as you tack on those floors of additional workloads.
Matt, with our financial services customers, they've got varying levels of information and their adoption towards the cloud. And, as part of that journey, it takes strong orchestration across people, process, and technology to create these successful landing zones. Do you have a specific customer in mind that we can start with where you can share some best practices with the audience today?
I do. I actually have a banking customer that I've been working with for a little over a year now. So this customer, a lot of they're a regional bank headquartered in the US. They have branches across the US. Like many financial institutions, security is absolute utmost importance. So any decision that we made, security top of mind. And one of their primary goals was similar to, again, many of my other FSI customers, which the first one is they want to migrate out of the data centers, but they also at the same time want to look for avenues of generating new revenue that cloud might provide that on-premises didn't.
Yeah, a lot of organizations have their challenges, big and small. So, Matt, can you talk about the challenges that our financial services customers frequently encounter? And I'm sure many of the folks watching will be able to relate.
Sure. So really, like one of the biggest challenges that I see within this customer as well as across of other customers is really internal communication. Oftentimes, central IT is really operating in a bubble. Central IT within itself, there may not be a lot of communication there, and there's definitely tends to be some gaps in communication with central IT in the business. So that's always a big challenge because ultimately you're driving this forward for the business. Another one is risk aversion, right? Like moving into the cloud potentially creates new risk. You have to understand those risks. You have to mitigate those risks. And if you have a very risk adverse organization, any type of change, and cloud represents significant change, tends to raise people's awareness of that risk. Another piece is lack of resources. Everyone is working with less these days than they used to work with. So these lack of resources, this could be money. This could also be personnel. Everyone is doing more with less, and that can definitely create some challenges around a cloud journey. And then another piece is, cloud is still relatively new. We all may have dabbled in it a bit. You have some companies which are just beginning the journey. So it's very much leverages a lot of the same technical concepts that we're all familiar with, but they're implemented in a very different manner. And learning that different manner and how you consume that is definitely going to be a challenge for a lot of organizations. And the other thing is we all have tons to do. And oftentimes the priorities of those things that we have to do don't tend to be very clear. And that lack of prioritization or that gap in prioritization really makes the journey into cloud very, very challenging because you're working on so many different things and you don't know what to prioritize. So those were the biggest challenges with this customer. And I would say they're very common across all of the customers that I work with.
Matt, I would agree, right? With our financial services customers, these are really, challenging times and also challenges that they have to deal with. Now, as our financial services customers go through this journey of adoption and onboarding and coordination, what are some of the top considerations that they need to keep in mind? Maybe we can think about this as a phased approach. And maybe could you outline kind of what that phases would look like?
Sure. So whenever I engage with a customer, I typically divide it into 3 separate phases. The first phase is discovery. It's all about identifying your current state, identifying key decision makers and doers, identifying risk gaps and potential mitigation, because that gives you a picture of what things are today, what your potential gaps are going to be as you move forward. The next piece of it at a high level is really prioritization. And this is, again, when we talk about one of the big challenges, this is where organizations really have to think about what is going to be the priority to them. And oftentimes the way I kind of simplify this from a core priorities perspective is I tell companies to think about 3 separate priorities: move fast, cut cost, or prioritize or be secure. You can't make all 3 the number 1 priority. So typically when I work with a customer, I'll have them walk through which is the number 1 priority. And we use these order of these 3 priorities as our guiding light for decisions that we have to make moving forward. The next piece really is dependency mapping. So when you really go through and think about this overarching cloud journey, a lot of times what happens is everyone tries to do everything at once. And what ends up occurring when you have that gap in dependency mapping is you miss dependency. So you try to do step 7 before you've done step 1. And the last phase in the process is really the one that everyone likes to kind of jump to, which is building out the landing zone and deploying the initial workload. The important piece to draw here is really, if you jump to that stage 3, you're going to miss these first 2 phases. And if you'd like, I can kind of dig a little bit deeper into those first 2 phases because I think of an importance factor. The third one is there's a lot of help and aid that you could find out there within partner organizations, within professional services, and there's lots of expertise companies have in that piece. It's really the first 2 pieces where companies struggle the most.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's probably going to be a stretch that I'm trying to make here, but for example, like I was building a desk or 2 desks for my 2 kids, and we would just want to get right to the desk part and put the monitor on, but you have to build that foundation, right? So you spoke that metaphor about the discovery piece, right? Finding all those right pieces to that would build that foundation. What are some of the most important areas of focus for this first phase of discovery?
So the key single most important thing that a lot of organizations miss is really understanding the current state of people, process, and technology. Oftentimes, what happens is we want to treat cloud as greenfield, but the reality for most FSIs is that's just not reasonable. It's going to be a brownfield approach. You're going to have to take things with you because many of times you're going to have data that's going to remain on premises. You're going to need cross connectivity between these 2 things. So taking the time to do discovery across people, processing, technology, like thinking things about like, what is the reporting structure within your organization? Who are going to be the decision makers? What are the processes that you have today, and how might those processes need to change to do the things that you want to do in the future? And one of the other things that I really suggest to customers is really to do an environmental assessment. Now, there's a few ways they can do this. They can do this with self-discovery by looking at how things look today, identifying technologies that could be reused and which technologies need to go. We have some great engagements with our Microsoft technology centers where we can help provide some of this discovery. Professional services are great. And I've also published a questionnaire that I use with customers. It's up on my GitHub. We can provide a link later. That is a group of questions across people, process, and technology that I typically gather with any given customer to get a real good picture of that. The next piece of it is really mapping out roles and responsibilities. And what I mean by this is really putting together a RACI. Understand who is responsible for things, meaning that they have a role in delivering something, and who's accountable. So because the accountable people are often going to be your decision makers. And when you're moving into cloud, you're going to have lots of decisions that need to be made that involve risk acceptance. And you're going to need to know who the accountable individual is that can accept that risk. And then the last piece really is about identifying risks to success and timelines and gaps in process and technology. So this is where you need to look at holistically your organization. Is it realistic that you're going to be able to do it yourself? I would say 80% of the time, no, it's not going to be realistic. You're going to do it yourself. You're going to have gaps in skills, you're going to have gaps in personnel, and you're going to have gaps in technology. So identifying those risks and looking for ways to mitigate those things by maybe bringing in professional services, hiring some additional people that may have more experience in it, and also really, again, understanding and documenting process and taking and revisiting that process to figure out maybe it's the way you've done it for the past 15 years, but it might not be the way that you can do it moving forward. And then lastly, the technology piece, assessing what you have technical products today and analyzing whether or not you want to take those products with you. In some cases, it may make sense. In some cases, it may not. And in other cases, you're going to have gaps. And understanding those gaps ahead of time, that allows you to properly assess some of the cloud native tools that might be a better shift than grabbing a third party and dropping it in there and paying, what tends to be higher cost for that third party. And also when you think about the shared responsibility model, any of those things you take with you, you're going to own more of the responsibility versus if it's a cloud provided service, you get to shift some of that responsibility to the cloud provider.
Matt, I think that discovery across people, process, and technology is going to lead to a lot, right? And when these financial services organizations are thinking about prioritizing, prioritization is frequently seen as one of those things that can lead to analysis by paralysis. So can you talk to us about some of the aspects that a customer struggles with and maybe how they get past it?
One of the again, this really gets back into what I think is probably the easiest way to move a lot of decisions forward is really thinking about your core priorities in regards to these 3 items that I have here: save money, move fast, be secure. Establish those 3 priorities, agree upon those amongst the decision makers within your organization. And once you have that there, everyone has agreed that these are the priorities. So when a decision pops up and you're stuck, I don't know what to do, you always can go back to this guiding light of these top 3 priorities to know, like, hey, if we do it this way, we can save $20,000, but saving money is priority number 3. And if we did this, we're going to introduce additional risk, which is our, reducing risk and maintaining a secure environment is priority number 1. It helps you make those decision-making processes. Another one, which I covered a little bit earlier, was dependency mapping again. When you move forward with cloud is not a project. Cloud is a program, and it needs to be treated with appropriate program management, where you're mapping out the things that you need to do. You're identifying dependencies. You're identifying how many resources need to be allocated to each of those products, where the interdependencies are on those resources, and then drawing out a plan as to how you're going to move forward with this program and keeping very close track on all of these various projects in the program. So cloud program management in general is absolutely critical to real success in the cloud.
Yeah, I think that, that mapping piece is super critical. And once you get, the discovery and prioritization phases in place, it sounds like the toughest parts are out of the way. It's not the fun parts, but it's the toughest ones. And it leads to an easier path for success with the fun part, designing and building. So how do we work with the customer to approach this phase?
So there's a few different approaches that could go with. One of the things that I recommend to customers right out of the gates is to engage your Microsoft account team and run through an engagement with the Microsoft Technology Center. It's not going to cost you anything. You're going to walk out with a vision of where you want to go. And then for many customers, I would highly recommend that customers don't try to do this themselves. I work with customers that do, and they are successful, but it takes exponentially longer to be successful than those customers who work with professional services and bring in that expertise, thus that they're not going through and potentially making decisions, which are bad decisions and other people have already made. So when you bring in this partner, you get the technical benefits that a partner might have or a professional services organization might have, like, you know, predefined templates and things of that nature. But most importantly, you get the knowledge of what works and what doesn't work. Because if you go in there initially yourself without the knowledge, you're going to make the same mistakes that other people have made, which is going to cost you time and money. And there's simply no reason to make the same mistakes that others have made. So that, I think, is probably the best way to initially approach it. And typically, the other thing that you can look at too is working with your account team after you do that MTC, or ideally before you do that MTC, to look into leveraging resources like myself and my peer Brian to help you through that journey and help provide you some of that advice and guidance through that process.
Matt, thank you very much for walking us through this real customer example and really illustrating how having the right pieces in place can lead to success. With our audience ready to go through this journey, what are some of the resources that they should start with? You've got a bunch listed here on the slide, which we'll be sure to link in our at the bottom of our YouTube video here as well. But talk to us about it.
So one of the first is the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework. So this is our cloud adoption framework that we put out. It is an awesome reference material for going about and adopting cloud. Any single aspect of cloud adoption that you need to think about is included within here. So this I would reference as basically, this is your, if you could talk about your authoritative reference, it's going to be this. You're going to consume it as much as you need to consume it, and you need to consume it in pieces because it's huge. It's thousands of pages. So you need to look at the high level phases that it maps out, start at that phase and go through the incremental steps. Another very useful reference material is our well-architected framework. So this is more applicable to workloads, but it's going to get you in the mindset of the things that you need to think about as you're designing your workloads. And as you're designing your work, when you're thinking about building out your landing zone, you should have a few workloads in mind, because those workloads are going to play into requirements for that landing zone design. Another one near and dear to my heart is the Cloud Security Alliance Security Guidance. So this is a must-read for anyone that is consuming cloud. Cloud Security Alliance has put out unbelievable guidance that really helps translate from a security perspective, what are the things that you need to care about and how are they going to differ from how you handle them on premises. Another thing I put together is called a cloud cheat sheet. So I put this together with kind of the things that I see customers missing most frequently. It's consumable, it's about 10 slides, very bulleted, very high level, but it's going to pick on all the things over the many years that I've been doing this, the things that you're going to miss and the things that are going to be critically important and how you can address those. Then another thing that I've been putting together is a number of different labs. So I built out fully deployable labs. You can just drop them into some MSDN subscription or Visual Studio subscription, play around with this stuff, experience it and learn it. And the patterns that I use within these labs are patterns that my customers are using within FSI. So these are patterns that take security into mind. They have the network flows that you're going to typically see that are required within FSI organizations. So leveraging those labs and testing them, very useful. And the last one on there is something that one of my peers, Brian Counts, put together. And this really walks through from an Epics perspective, the various steps that you need to take when you start moving into Microsoft Azure or cloud in general. It is probably the most easy to consume reference material or high level project plan for any type of cloud adoption that I've ever come across. Brian did an amazing job summarizing it, and I would recommend everyone take a look at it and just align it with what you're doing now and see if there's things in there that Brian has that you don't have. You should have them in what you have.
No, this is awesome, Matt. I really appreciate your mindset of learn and teach by doing. So definitely take advantage of those labs, cheat sheets, etc. Thanks for talking to us about building that foundation ready for the bricks to lay on top. Let's move into building those first few floors. So speaking of bricks, great to have you on the show, Brian. And by brick, I don't mean you, but your topic is going to be around bricks. So you know the drill. What's your role at Microsoft? And I also hear COVID has its challenge, but you're learning some new valuable skills.
Yeah. So, thank you for having me for the show. I'm also a cloud solution architect for Microsoft. I've been in this role now for the past 5 years. Unlike Matt is on our Swarm team. I am pinned to a couple accounts, so I focus strictly on 2 or 3 accounts in FSI and helping them be successful in Azure. But yeah, this year, COVID has thrown us a curveball in the family, but also my wife's family has some health challenges. So I'm taking care of my 3 boys on our own, and I'm helping teach them how to cook. And it turns out that my oldest has found a little knack. He's turning into a pretty good chef, but he also, I think it's up to him. We would have steak and lobster every day for dinner, but he's definitely, I think he's found a new interest in cooking. So have I, actually.
Brian, yeah, I'm one of 3 boys, so I know exactly the challenges that you're facing. So let's just jump right in, Brian.
Sure.
The financial services customers that you work with, they have a lot of data, and they continue to produce more data. How are our customers using this data to their advantage, and what can they actually do with it?
Yeah, that's correct. For a long time, applications have been generating a ton of data, right? Wherever that data might be. But for a long time, that data has been locked away within those applications. What companies are realizing is that data is very valuable to them. It's not a new concept. Technology companies like Google or Facebook have realized that data they're sitting on is very valuable. But FSI customers are realizing themselves that it is valuable to them as well. So, data is that new currency. I've seen statistics that says companies that can tap into that into that data, they can double their operating margins, and they can add typically around $100 million in operating incomes to the revenue streams. So again, selling access to the data is not a new concept, but the way that they're doing it is a little different. In the past, companies would sell access to the data through some type of interface, like a REST API, for example. The clients will call that into, they would create applications that will call into that data. This requires a fair amount of R&D on the companies, and you got to determine what the clients need to see, what's important to that on that data. So what I'm seeing with my clients is a shift, and what they're now doing is offering analytics platforms as a service, and they're selling access to the raw data, and they know the clients know that the data is valuable, but may not know exactly what their clients want out of that data. And so they're actually offering as a service the direct access to the raw data. And it's letting their clients ask questions that they may not be thinking of themselves, and letting their clients determine what's important to them. And our FSI clients are actually charging for that access.
Yeah, Brian, it definitely sounds like a topic that would resonate with our audience. I mean, we've had previous FSI Friday sessions where, intelligent payments and just using things with data to provide a better experience for your customers, to provide, more services for the banks themselves and the, financial services customers. Do you have any examples of this that you can share, and what was the result?
Yeah, I definitely have a few examples overall. This is something that could be applied through all FSI customers. So it's not just banking or capital markets, also insurance. So all of our segments in FSI can take advantage of this. So a couple of examples I have is, say you're a fintech, and typically a fintech will sell technology to small to mid-sized banks, and those technologies will be running on-premise at that bank's on-premise there. Now, those fintechs have been transitioning over the past few years to offering their technology as a service. So it could be banking as a service, and they're using the cloud to offer those technologies to those small and mid-sized banks. In that case, the fintechs now has access to all that data. So it could be transactions, it could be ACH transfers, it could be payment card processing. The fintechs have access to all that data. Now, they can offer that data in return to those small banks through an API, or, like I said before, they are now offering that as a service to the raw data. So that bank might want to have their own data scientists or their own data engineers directly querying that data. And they can use that now with something like Databricks, so Azure Databricks. Another example is something like Zillow. Now, Zillow, you don't think of Zillow like as a financial services company, but they are actually. They offer home loans now. They specialize in real estate data, and they offer it as a service through an API. But they could also be trying to sell it to their clients directly. So, you know, if they're working with like a real estate broker or a builder, the builder might have questions about that data that Zillow is not thinking of. And unless Zillow creates an API for that builder to query, that builder can't use that data. Now, as a service, using like again Azure Databricks, the builder can actually query that data themselves, create models, AI models or machine learning or AI models themselves, and it's something that's powerful for the builder themselves to ask questions that Zillow couldn't answer themselves.
Brian, you mentioned this thing called Databricks or Azure Databricks. Can you help our audience understand, for those that have never heard the term, in layman terms, what it actually means and what can the service actually do?
Sure. Azure Databricks is an extremely scalable data transformation and compute platform. It is typically used by data engineers, data scientists, developers to create reports, machine learning models, models like regression analysis, predictive analytics. Databricks is actually not a service created by Microsoft. It is created by a company called Databricks themselves. It is offered as a first-party offering inside Azure, so that's kind of unique in the cloud. So you could run Databricks and other cloud providers, but it's not a first-party. And what I mean by that is you can use your Azure monetary commits to pay for Databricks completely. You know, of other cloud providers, you have to have a separate agreement with Databricks, and that's a big selling point for a lot of the FSI clients that I'm working with. They love the fact that they don't have to go to Microsoft and they have Azure already in place. They can just utilize Databricks right on the fly and take advantage of it. So at the end of the day, Databricks is a compute platform. It's based on something called Apache Spark, which is an open source technology. And it's a way for you to use massive scale compute against your data.
Yeah, no, Brian, first of all, it sounds like we've invested a really good partnership with Databricks to make it easily accessible to our customers. It's always great to have less friction in order to get, and analyze data that you want. It's also great that, this can apply to landing zones we talked earlier. So let's throw in some visuals here. If you could walk us through the workflow, please.
So yeah, I want to back up a little bit. So Azure Databricks is great. It's a great compute tool, but it needs the data, right? It needs data someplace that it can consume it and work on. Typically, what we see is that data is stored in some type of cloud storage. In Azure, that would be something like Azure Storage or Azure Data Lake Store, we call ADLS. How the data arrives and what kind of scope and scale of that is going to be a little bit outside of this talk today, but that's definitely one area that we work closely with clients on is, what data they have, what format should it be in the cloud storage so that Databricks can take advantage of it. But once that data arrives in the storage, and then you have Databricks themselves, and it's going to access that data. There's two main components to Azure Databricks. There is this collaborative workspace, and then there's compute clusters. The compute clusters are just servers. They could be one server. It could be hundreds of servers. I've seen Databricks clusters upwards of 500 nodes or more doing work. It all depends on the size and scale of the data that you're going to work on. You write code in it using Python or Scala or R or SQL. So there's a whole variety of different languages that you use to develop with. The workspace is where you do the development, and that's where your data scientists or engineers will access to it. So there's a nice web portal, and you can write code through that web portal. And typically that's offered internally. That's offered through to your own internal employees. But again, more and more we're seeing is customers are offering that portal access to external users from your company, and that's what you're selling access to. So those users will access through the Databricks workspace, and they're accessing your raw data that's stored in that cloud storage.
Brian, this is a great visual to kind of help our customers understand kind of the different levels and layers of, where the data is, to then who's actually going to be using that, to how it's going to be visualized. We've got another diagram that's coming up here that is really going to talk to us about maybe how our financial services customers can actually organize this from an architectural perspective, right? The data lives in one spot, but then I've got a client over here, and I've got another client over here. How can I leverage Azure Databricks to provide that data scientist in that client to be able to access that kind of common data? Could you walk our audience through this a little bit?
In the diagram in the upper left, you see this common data lake. That's where your data, that's what you're selling access to, right? So if you're a fintech and you offer ACH or payment processing, for example, you might store in that all your transactions, the actual transaction. They could be anonymized, so they're not showing actual true clients or information, but you might have all your transactions stored there. If you're a Zillow, that could be real estate data. So you're going to store, homes, home values, property taxes, counties that belong to, things like that. They're going to be stored in that common data, and that's the value that you're selling. That is stored in a common, we call it data lake. Now, you want to have that offered securely to multiple different clients, and we're going to take advantage of multiple different technologies to do that. Primarily, something called private endpoints. Private endpoints are a unique tunnel that are deployed on a per client basis. So in this diagram, I have 2 clients, and Databricks is deployed into what we call an Azure virtual network. So it's a private IP space, it's a private area of Azure carved out just for that client. And Databricks is deployed there, so that's where the cluster lives. And I'm going to project my common data lake into that virtual network securely. So it's a private endpoint, and it's the only way I can access that data. Now, I might also offer for my clients a place that they have for their own client data. So if I'm a fintech, I might have data that's very specific just to one type of bank that I don't want to offer to another bank. So client 1 will have a common data lake they can see, and then they have very specific data just for that client, and they would offer through another data lake that also projected into the virtual network using private endpoints. And then the same thing with client 2. So that client 2 will have its own information. The common data lake will be projected into the virtual network for that client, and both are isolated. So I can isolate it at a Azure subscription level, and that way I can see exactly what those clients are using, and I can bill back to those clients, plus some type of fee, so I can make money on a new revenue stream.
Yeah, it's great, Brian. I mean, it's nice to see client isolation and data security, which is always top of mind for our financial services customers. Our audience would like to see how this would be implemented in practice. So specifically, how, our Databricks, how can it be deployed as a service for multiple clients? And can you share your screen and show us how the pieces tie together?
The Azure portal. So this is, if you're used to Azure, this is pretty traditional in what you've seen before. What I'm showing here is 3 environments. My core environment, so this is where my data will be stored for to shared across all clients. And then I have my client 1 and client 2 and their own Azure subscription. So you can see client 1 is deployed into one subscription, and then client 2 is deployed into another subscription. I'm all in the same Azure region, but it could be deployed in different regions as well if I need to. So if I go into the core, this is where my data lake is stored. So I will have my customer data deployed into different containers. And again, going back to a couple of examples, if you're Zillow, I will have all my data stored in these containers. Oh, actually, I got this authorization. So this is actually a good thing to show. Wasn't expecting it, but I'm showing here is I'm isolating my management plane from my data plane. So as a user, I don't have access to the data. I'm an administrator of the overall system, but I don't have access to the underlying data, which is great from a compliance and security standpoint. So sorry about that a little bit on the demo. But yeah, in this data lake, I'm going to store my data. If I'm Zillow, it could be the property data that for home values. If it's fintech, it might be my payment processing. So actually the actual credit card transactions and things like that. I'm going to store it here. And then you can see I have a key vault here. Key vault is going to be used for encryption. So at rest, I want my data encrypted, so for security. And I'm going to use key vault for managed keys to make sure that everything at rest is encrypted. And then if I go into the various clients, you'll see that I have, let's scroll down, my Databricks workspace. We'll go into the workspace in a second. And you see these endpoints here. These are the endpoints that I actually connect to. These are the projections of the common data into my environment. So I can access this data strictly through this endpoint here from Databricks that client one can't access. So I can keep my isolation of the clients through those endpoints. And again, I also have a key vault for encryption at rest. I have my own data lake for client data that's specifically just to the client. And I have the same thing over for client one, so that I can script this all out. I can use things for automation wise, so I can, as I win clients, as I sell this as a service to customers, I can deploy each of these environments as a unique stamp, and then I can see exactly how much they are charging based on cost analysis. And the reason I do that is because Databricks, like I said, it can scale from 1 node to 100 nodes, and I can charge based on how many nodes that my customer is using. So if the one customer is using hundreds of nodes, then I can charge back for that, because I got to pay that Microsoft for the Azure usage. I'm going to charge back my clients for that. If they're only using a couple nodes, then I can charge back based on what their usage is. So this is the Azure Workspace. This is the Azure portion of it. We'll go actually into the portal in a second, but it just shows you from a management perspective where I can control access from into the workspace, additional encryption and things like that. So
Brian, this is great, right? I love how you were able to kind of show the isolation of client data, even that security, that role-based access control to really secure that data, which is, again, always top of mind for our financial services customers. But could you show us just quickly kind of what that experience would look like as a data scientist, right?
Yep.
That has access maybe to this workspace as a client, and what that experience would look like?
Yep. Yeah, so I can launch the workspace through the UI here, but the URL for the Databricks is actually a public URL. So it's something I can access from anywhere that has that I can they can call into this URL. So every workspace is unique. So I would have a dedicated workspace per client, and so they will log in. I can find access controls through the Databricks workspace as well. So this way is clients and the data scientists and data engineers, they never see Azure. They don't need to see Azure at all. All they care about is the workspace, because that's where the code is going to be at. That's where they want to execute what they're going to, the models they're going to build, their reports they're going to generate. That's all they really care about. So this is all done through here. So in the workspace, I have clusters. So this is where I would define my compute platform. And I have one cluster running. If I create another cluster, you can see here I have the types of nodes. So again, if I'm a data scientist, I'm going to make sure I need to have whole variety of machines at the types. Some of them could be memory intensive. Some are just general purpose machines, and I can define how big I want to make the cluster. So 2 nodes, 8 nodes, 100 nodes, all depends on what I need to do. And my data science will kind of understand exactly what they want to do, and they will scale that cluster to that. And then for cost savings, you can actually terminate the sessions. For a customer who's worried about cost, I can terminate that after 120 minutes or something that's configurable, and I can scale it automatically. So I can say 2 nodes to start with, but if I'm going to do a really intense job, it may scale up automatically to 8 nodes based on what my code does. So I define my cluster here. Each workspace can have multiple different clusters. So again, if I'm offering it as a service to my clients and they have 3 or 4 different data scientists, they can have each of their own clusters dedicated to themselves, or they can share a cluster if they want to. So that's a cluster. That's where your code runs. But the heart of it is actually at the workspace. And workspace is where you are going to write your code. And this is a very, very simple example. I'm not actually a data scientist. I work with clients on an infrastructure and security aspect of Azure. So forgive me if my video is not, or the demo is not the most visually appealing, but what a data scientist will do is come in here and they're going to write their code. Like I mentioned before, this is for, they write this in Python or in Scala, R, or SQL. And they're going to write their code, and they can write code to do whatever they want. In this case, I'm just attaching some data to my cluster. So this is actually my common data. So I'm attaching that common data that I have, accessing, and so it's going to be available over this endpoint here. And I can read data, and I can do some data transforms. And if I scroll down to this a little bit, this is more of an example of how I'm going to do some data transforms. And I'm going to create this table, and I'm going to do some transformation on the data, and I'm going to read my data from the that data lake, and I'm going to store that data into my table. And from my table, I can do visualizations. I can use something like Power BI to create visualization, or I can just use it to create reports, or I can use it to create, if I'm a data scientist, I'm going to create an AI model for myself. And I can use it in applications downstream for whatever purpose that might be.
So Brian, this is really great stuff. Just being able to see kind of what the data scientists can actually do with the data, and then get to a visualization. Could you talk to us about, I know you have a case study example here from one of our financial services customers that have actually leveraged Databricks. Do you want to kind of chat with our audience just a little bit around this implementation with them?
Yeah, definitely. So most of the clients I work with, they are, almost every client I work with right now has Databricks of some sort in their environment. It is typically internally facing. It is, they have their own data scientists, they're using it, but they don't have any public case studies yet. But there are a bunch of case studies up on our customers.microsoft.com site, and they are FSI clients. One of them is a company called PureFacts, and they offer insights as a service. So they're using Azure Databricks to generate insights. Now, they're not offering access to the raw data. What they're accessing is these insights, and they're offering those insights through the traditional APIs. But they're using Databricks to generate those insights. And if you're thinking about from PureFacts, they could, long term, is figure out a way to use Databricks to offer the raw data directly to those clients. So you have the API, and the API is what has your insights there. Or you can offer as another revenue stream access to the raw data, and that raw data is very valuable to other clients that PureFacts may not understand. They may not have the time to develop it, or they don't have the resources to develop it. As Matt mentioned earlier, if we're trying to do more with less, so they can actually shift left that responsibility to their clients, give them access to that raw data, and let them see what their clients come up with, and they're selling access to that data as a service.
Yeah, thank you, Brian. This has been super helpful. It looks like we're running out of time, so thank you for sharing your time and perspectives. I'm positive the viewers have learned a wealth of valuable information. What we learned today is it's important to leverage a landing zone as orchestration across people, process, and technology play a critical role. Azure Databricks provides a solid foundation for data platform as a service, where companies can take raw data and build a solution that unleashes new revenue streams. If you're interested in starting the journey, or if you're in the middle of it and would like some guidance, please reach out to your account teams and we could schedule an envisioning session and follow up. Really great stuff. So Johansson, unfortunately, looks like we're out of time, but how do customers continue to engage with FSI Fridays and ask questions for the session?
Yeah, thanks, Edwin. Thanks everyone for attending as well, whether you're watching live or watching on YouTube. If you haven't already, feel free to continue to register at aka.ms FSI Fridays to see kind of upcoming schedules and updates. If you've got feedback around this session or would like to ask a question to one of our great presenters, feel free to reach us at aka.ms/FSI Fridays feedback. Be sure to like and subscribe if this video is valuable and you want future videos like this appearing. So Edwin, we've got an awesome rest of the lineup for November. Why don't you give an audience our preview of what's happening for the rest of the month?
Absolutely. So here's the remaining lineup for our Cloud Native November. On November 13, modernizing any business process or application comes with a host of challenges, especially the data layer. So Joe Carver will discuss a multitude of options around the Azure Data Services Catalog, which offers, how each service provides the required scalability, availability, and security for financial services organizations. And finally, on November 20, we'll have a fireside chat with our General Manager, Shaka Rashid, and Managing Director, Mike Triolo, show on real customer examples of how cloud computing is helping make organizations more agile and resilient, and why this is important, especially in a post-COVID world. You'll hear real examples of this in FSI and in parallel industries, as well as learn what's on the horizon of innovation in the cloud for financial services. You will not want to miss it. Thanks again, and see you next time on FSI Fridays. Thank you.